Washington just received another no. Nigeria just said no to the United States, and not just to any policy, but to a core part of Donald Trump's revived immigration agenda. This isn't just about deportations, of course. It is about sovereignty, respect, and a major shift in how Africa is choosing to engage with the West. This is a very interesting topic. There's a lot going on in Africa with respect to the shifting power towards multipolarity, and I'm going to cover this in greater detail going forward here on my channel. Now, let's break down the details. Nigerian Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuggar made headlines when he flat out rejected a U.S. proposal for a third country deportation deal. As you may know well, under Trump's plan, migrants that are detained in the United States, regardless of whether they have any connection to Nigeria in this case, would be deported to African countries willing to take them. Eswatini and South Sudan, for example, have already agreed to this plan. But Nigeria said, we have enough problems of our own. And that one sentence signals something much bigger. For decades, U.S. Africa relations have followed a very familiar and quite predictable pattern. Washington sets the terms, it gives some aid to African countries, which is effectively just something that fuels Africa's dependence on the West, on its assistance, while also exploitation continues. And then the West expects compliance in return. It expects African countries to not even want to rebuild their sovereignty. And not just compliance, but effectively dancing to the tune of U.S. foreign policy. During the Cold War, the United States used African countries as tools against the spread of communism. And after the Cold War ended, things have shifted somewhat, but the goal has never been to truly aid African nations overcome the aftermath of their, in most cases, colonial past. Whether it is military cooperation, economic reforms, or in this case, immigration enforcement, the dynamic has been largely one-sided. But Nigeria just broke that mold. This isn't just about refusing to host deported migrants. This is about drawing a red line against the transactional foreign policy that many African nations have accepted for too long. Nigeria isn't defending just its borders. It is defending its agency, its right to say no. And we see more and more countries standing up to Trump's bullying policies. India just refused to cut off its purchases of Russian energy to appease the White House. Indian foreign minister even said that India would not allow its economic policy to be set in Washington. So that was a very interesting statement, a very meaningful one. The world is definitely waking up. It is a good trend to observe. Now, let's talk context. Trump's third country deportation model isn't new. He tried it in Latin America during his first term, some of you might recall. Well, right now, with a second term in motion, he is reviving the idea and he's looking toward Africa in this case. What's the plan? Well, the plan is to outsource border control. The plan is to deport migrants to countries that had nothing to do with their journey. And to use aid, to use trade, and to use visa deals as leverage. If that sounds familiar, it's only because it should sound familiar by now. The United Kingdom's plan with Rwanda followed the same logic. So did the EU's offshore processing proposal. It is a broader Western trend, outsourcing migration problems, pushing the consequences onto nations with fewer resources. But Nigeria's rejection cuts through all of that. Let's look at why Nigeria chose to stand up to President Trump. With a population of over 230 million people, Nigeria is facing serious challenges such as food insecurity, youth unemployment, conflict in the north, and economic instability. These issues are very similar to those faced by many African nations. Nigeria's prison system is already 137% over capacity. Taking in deportees with no legal or cultural ties to Nigeria would, without any ounce of doubt, would make things much, much worse for the country, not better. But it's not just domestic pressure, of course. Nigeria's foreign policy rests on what it calls the 4Ds: democracy, development, demography, and diaspora. This framework is about building partnerships that respect Nigerian priorities, and then hosting unwanted deportees from the United States simply doesn't fit in. It is quite clear, it is obvious. Now, let's not pretend that this decision is without risk. Refusing the United States, especially under Trump, comes with consequences. Nigeria is a top African trading partner with the United States, with bilateral trade nearing $10 billion in 2024 alone. Nigeria plays a key role in peacekeeping, in counterterrorism, and regional diplomacy. And just recently, it joined BRICS as a partner country, putting it on a collision course with new U.S. tariffs targeting BRICS states. So yes, this moment is quite politically loaded. But here's the bigger picture. Nigeria's decision reflects a broader awakening across the global south and, of course, across Africa. More and more countries are questioning the old rules, the rules where African nations were expected to enforce Western priorities in exchange for short-term aid, which wasn't truly aid. It was just a little carrot with no strings attached, or shaky promises of investment at best. It is, therefore, not surprising that more and more African nations are shifting toward partnering with China, partnering with Russia, the UAE, Turkey, and Iran. It is a whole different dynamic. And of course, dependence on those nations will increase, but they do play by different rules. Think back to the 1980s and the 1990s when structural adjustment programs pushed by the IMF and World Bank crippled African economies under the guise of reform. Or after 9/11, when the continent, the entire continent, became a staging ground for the West's counterterrorism policies. For too long, African nations were treated like subcontractors, outsourcing partners in someone else's crisis, and that era is clearly ending. South Africa, for example, it is already resisting U.S. pressure on trade and on foreign policy. It is maintaining ties with Russia and with Iran, of course, with China, even while negotiating trade terms with Washington. Nigeria's decision adds fuel to that fire. It shows Trump that he is not in a position, he is in no position to order countries what to do. Those days are long gone. And let's not forget, other powers are watching: China, Russia, Turkey, Qatar, the UAE. They're all expanding their reach in Africa through deals, through foreign direct investment, through trade, through weapons sales too, for better or for worse. And that comes without lectures or political involvement, by the way. No strings, no moral conditions, just business and diplomacy on mutually agreeable terms. That makes a difference. And yes, these deals come with their own risks, of course, but for many African leaders, they represent an alternative to the neocolonialism of the West. That's why Nigeria's stance matters so much, and this is why it is so important. It's not just symbolic, it challenges the assumption that the United States can still buy compliance, that it can still purchase compliance. It forces a conversation about what real partnership looks like. Because if the United States continues to treat diplomacy like a marketplace where aid is currency and sovereignty is for sale, then it is going to lose ground. It is already losing ground globally, not just in Nigeria, across the continent and far beyond. That is why a fake sense of winning is so important to a certain leader on the Capitol Hill. It is about the performance, a theatrical show, not substance. Here's the truth. In the 21st century, power alone can guarantee loyalty. Partnership, not pressure, is the new currency of diplomacy, and Nigeria just reminded the world of that fact. So what happens now? Will more African nations follow Nigeria's lead? Will the United States rethink its approach to Africa in the face of growing competition from other global powers? Perhaps. It would be wise to do so, but we don't know yet. One thing is very clear: Africa is not waiting to be told what to do, and Nigeria just showed that sometimes saying no is not an act of defiance, it is an act of leadership. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate you joining me for this video. If you found it interesting, remember to hit like, subscribe, and also follow me on Substack and Patreon, as well as on other social media platforms. You will find them linked below. Thanks so much, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye for now.